Hello and welcome to today's Criterion Learning Series presentation. My name is Steve Tompkins, Principal Solutions Architect with Criterion, and today we're going to be talking about open positions. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll switch over to my browser. As while I'm doing that, I do want to remind everybody that we do have a chat and a Q&A, so if you do have any questions, feel free to use that to reach out to us. And I'll try to answer your questions during the presentation today. And if we cannot, we'll reach back out to you and make sure your questions do get answered. So thank you for using that if you need to. All right, so let's go ahead and start here in self-service. And as normal, the most of this is going to be happening on the administrative side because that's where you're going to typically have your open positions and be able to interact with them and to be able to do those things in there. I do want to point out, of course, that open positions can actually start over here. As a hiring manager, I might be able to do a requisition to request an open position through this menu right here that says recruiting. And then you'll notice here I can create an open position. I can also view the current positions where I am a hiring manager. So I could view those in here in self-service. And of course, once I'm viewing this, I get a very similar view to what I see in the administrative side in recruiting. And so you can see all this information here. Of course, once the position is approved, I'm not able to edit this information. That's for the recruiter to edit. But I can view my candidates and look at their information as I need to do that. So very simple to be able to navigate around in there, like I said, under job postings here. And of course, creating a position right here in the top right. I can create a position, which of course looks very similar to the screen we were just on that was all read-only. But of course, now I'm going to go through and fill in this information. Now, I'm not going to go through this right this moment because I do want to talk about some of the setup stuff that would need to happen. All right, so you get an idea of what it looks like for a manager. So let's hop on over to recruiting and we'll talk about some of the things that need to happen over there for a manager or even a hiring manager, recruiter, excuse me, to be able to create an opening. So here you'll see, again, very similar view to what we see in self-service for my jobs. Now I have a different number of jobs because these are the jobs that are visible to the recruiter, and the hiring manager may not be the same hiring manager on every position. So that's why I see a different number of jobs over here. Now, before I click add a job, which will be very similar to what you just saw, we want to talk about where the configuration of this stuff comes from. And so I'm going to go to positions first, and then we'll go into the settings for recruiting. But the positions must be set up for you to have an open position. You can't have a position that you're hiring into if it doesn't exist. So your positions would be set up here under positions. And of course, this is also available if I went under HR, you would see positions. So it doesn't matter if you're under recruiting or HR, you go to positions. All right, and then what I'll do is I will click on one of these and you'll see, of course, just the basic stuff. Now, some of this stuff doesn't even talk to the recruiting, per se. It's stuff more for HR. But of course, because it's all one system here, we don't have like a separate positions screen that's just for recruiting. We just have, certain fields that are going to be useful for recruiting and maybe not useful for other fields may not be useful for recruiting. So you'll see these filled in, and I'm not going to go over every field. If you are curious about the definition of every field, you can always go to your help screen right here, and this does have what every field means out there. All right, so you can see the details as I go down. All right, but key to recruiting are a few things. Of course, you're going to want to have the code. Now, the code may not be the same as the title, mine is the same, but it may be you use an abbreviation or you have some type of numbering scheme or something like that. And that's totally okay, as this might say like 0001 or FV or something like that. And then the title, of course, that's the title for the position that an employee would eventually have if they're hired into this. All right, now this one is something that might be useful for recruiting. So I have 25 full-time equivalency here, which really, what that means is I could potentially have up to 25 full-time employees or maybe less than 25 or more than 25 people, but some of them are not full-time. They're less than full-time, maybe they're half-time. So maybe I have 30 people in these 25 slots because some of those people are not full-time. All right, and you'll see other information that, again, may be useful for your recruiting, but you'll see all those stuff here. But let's talk about what's under recruiting here. And here you'll notice some of the things that you might have for either requirements or recommendations for a position here. So education, experience, security clearance, travel requirements, work from home requirements, and dress slash attire could all be things that are useful. You may want to have that information in there. Perhaps this is a position where you have a certain level of education or travel or something like that. So certainly you could have those completed there. Now these are code tables. So if you needed to say, okay, high school, college, doctorate, whatever is your education level, you put that. Same thing with experience. You'll see the little blue gear would allow me to edit this, or I can go to the code table. And so each one of these is very similar in that you can, see what I have in here as an example, and you can of course click on the gear to edit this if you need to. All right. Now the description is a job description. So you may have job descriptions somewhere. Maybe you've got a library of them out there somewhere on your network, and you want to put that in here. You can certainly do that there, or can type in there. So it's up to you as far as that works. And of course, you might use something like ChatGPT or Copilot or one of the AIs to help you out with a job description there. So you can certainly copy and paste in there. And you'll notice the formatting, like bold, italicized, et cetera, where you can put that in there. So, what I did is I went out and I found, a job description. And, I can copy and paste as an example right here. The advantage of this is that when you open a position, when we get back to the jobs here, it'll pull this job description in. So you don't have to do this every time. And then if you did need to edit it for the particular opening, you're certainly welcome to go and edit it. All right, you'll see here how this has got different formatting and stuff. Like I said, I just copied and pasted this in, and you certainly can, do that right there. All right, as we go down, we'll talk about some of these things. Now, we're not going to go into the settings of like offer letter and onboarding. We've certainly talked about those before in past trainings. But if you have created offer letters and you want to make that the default offer letter, let's say for a food vendor, you can select that right here. All right, so you can have that template available here. So if you had several templates, maybe you got different templates for different types of jobs, or maybe specific to each job, you could have that template right in here. And the same thing with an onboarding list. If you want to set up a certain onboarding list for this position, you might say, yeah, we're going to use this one called new hire onboarding or something. And that's going to be the default onboarding list. When you hire somebody, it'll pre-populate this onboarding list for them. And then you may add others, to the person when you get in there. And then of course, you'll see competencies and skills. So you can say, we need certain skills for this position here. Maybe there's this like a sales skill they need or something. You can come in here and do that. Now to get to these are set up under the skills. In particular, the category is in the code table, but these need to be configured before you get to this point. All right, so you can kind of get an idea here, see if I have any skills. Here we go. Maybe I say they need to be satisfactory in English. All right, so just to give you an example there, that could help you to find candidates who meet these criteria. Same thing with competencies there. All right, so that's the kind of the basics here under recruiting and the position. And I'll just go ahead and save this just so we have that there. Now, you may have a workflow that would require an approval before that updates. So just be aware if you go in and do change this and you have a workflow, you may not see it right away when you go to the open jobs. Okay, so back over here, you'll see here your open positions here. Now, if I do go in and I add a job description, I add skills, et cetera, to a position, it does not go to an existing opening and fill in the job description or things like that. So just be, concerned, or not concerned, but just be aware of that. If you do, you want to have a job description here, you already created the job, you'll probably need to go in, copy and paste what you had in there. But if I do create a new one, of course, it will pull that information in here. You'll see if I come in and I choose back up to the top, food vendor, it's going to pull in that job description. All right, and I'll do that there in a moment. I do want to talk about when I create a new one here, you have some options. Now, before I do that, I do want to go into the recruiting settings. So just give me 1 second to go there. Let's go to recruiting settings here. All right, so here you'll see some of the things in recruiting settings. These are by employer. The question set. So this is the default question set that you would put on a new open position when you create one. And the same thing with the employment application is the default one that would go there. All right, so you can leave those blank and then you choose when you go to open the job, which question set and or application you're going to use. If you do populate it here, it'll use it as default. Doesn't mean you can't change it though. So if you want to change that, you're welcome. And then you'll see here the employment application in the portal. That means show this when somebody goes to apply. So if you select an application, you don't actually have to use it by default. You could just say, you know what, yes, I want to have this. And then on each individual job, maybe I go and enable it. All right, so that's how that works there. Here you'll see, E-Verify. We've done a learning series on this. This is, of course, for somebody once they're hired, they need to complete their forms in the US, their I-9 form, and this ties into E-Verify. There are some settings in there about that, and we have talked about this in the past, but we don't need to talk about it here, and we'll probably cover one in the future on E-Verify and the I-9 and so forth. But that's what that's for here. Here you'll notice hide PII fields. That's for the candidates. That's personally identifiable information. So when a manager is looking at a candidate, maybe you don't want to show some of those things that are personally identifiable, like their gender, their ethnicity, their military service, their social security number or SIN. So we hide those right here with that setting. And then this one here, this is directly relevant to the open positions. You might have the system or want the system to auto assign a requisition number for you. So that's enabled there. And again, this is on a per employer basis. So if you do want to turn that on, you would have to go to both employers or multiple employers to turn that on. All right, so those are the settings there for that. Let me go back to that open job there. And I will go to the food vendor here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just use the job title here of food vendor. And of course, it's probably, there we go. All right, so now you'll notice your job title. So this is the internal position name, or what you call those employees, how they're classified maybe by you, but sometimes that doesn't necessarily match what the general public or people applying for the job might know that job as. So I've seen definitely situations where this has a, maybe something where corporate or even let's say the government says you need to call it this, but then everybody else would call it something else. So it could be different. And that's why we have this field here where you can edit this. I'm going to make it the same, but I could call this like concessions, maybe. I don't know, something like that. All right, so here you'll see the auto numbering is on requisition, so I can't edit this. It'll just pull from the last number and add one to it. All right, the career site location, this is a text field, so I can put that in there if I like. The salary is, it's an optional field. I can put in a salary, so I could do something like, I don't know, 15 to 20 per hour plus commission or something like that. Of course, I get to put in a number. I can do whatever I like. It's a text field. All right, so you'll see how that works right there. Now, the status, by default, it's open because, that's probably why you're creating this. You're going to have an open position, but it doesn't need to be. You can say it's on hold. Maybe there's, still some internal discussions. You want to start setting it up and you can put it on hold. And of course, the closed and filled. I don't know why you do that on a brand new job, but I guess you could create a job that's immediately closed or immediately filled, maybe for tracking purposes or something. All right, the number of open positions. So when you're hiring, if you are hiring multiple people for that job, maybe you've got 5 openings. If I put a 5 in here, what'll happen is the system will track how many people are hired and it'll count down and eventually it'll get to 0 if you hire all 5 and it will close that position for you. So it will like remove it from the job boards and things. Now you don't need to put a number in here, but if you like that automation, you may want to put a number in. All right, so I'll just put a 5 there. All right, the open date. So this doesn't necessarily need to be today. It could be on Monday. You want to start posting this and having people apply and stuff like that. So you can future date this if you want. If I do backdate it, it doesn't go back in time and suddenly make it appear on your website on Monday, even though now it's Thursday. But maybe for tracking purposes. All right, so you'll see that right there. And then internal open date. So if you are going to publish it internally, you might want to put a date there that maybe is the same date, maybe it's later or earlier. Okay. And then the close date. So this would stop posting it regardless of the number of open positions on a certain date. We run into this sometimes where you're opening it up through the end of October, and then you're going to start going through interviews and doing all the other stuff with the job in November until you find the right person. So you could use this close date here if you like. So you might want to say it's through the end of the month or something like that. Now, the hiring manager is a required field here. This is who's going to be going through this here. Now, when we talk about hiring manager, there is a security profile that we've added called hiring manager and another one called recruiter, so that you don't see everybody here. But if you're not seeing somebody, you're expecting to see, a certain person, you're not seeing them there. That means you need to add them as a security, or excuse me, add the security profile to them, have hiring managers, so they show up in this list. All right, and if I select more than one, I have the option to choose who is the primary hiring manager, and that can be used for approvals. So I can go ahead and do something like that if I needed to. And you'll see, of course, if I add somebody I didn't mean to, I can remove them. All right, very simple to do that right there. Of course, the recruiter, very similar. We have that recruiter security profile. So again, if you're not seeing somebody here who should be a recruiter, you'll need to add that security profile to them. So even if they're a system admin, it doesn't mean they're a recruiter. You need to add that security profile. All right, let's make Chris, the assistant manager, my recruiter there. Of course, notes if I need to type something in about this. As I mentioned, the defaults here for question set as well as application. I can override this if I want to make it something else, or maybe I don't want this at all. I can do that right there. Now, I can't check this box off without this. You'll notice how it became required, but I'm not required to check that box if I don't want to. So if I choose an application, I may not want to check this because maybe I want to send it as a form later. All right, so that's an example of how that works there. Of course, I can make the resume required. I can make a cover letter required, which of course means when somebody applies, they must have these things uploaded to move along and to apply for the position. And then the review template, this is something I don't have any currently configured. It is a performance review type for candidates. So you can maybe evaluate them on various criteria when somebody's doing an interview. So that's what that's for. All right, and then these 3 enable overrides right here, what this tells the system to do is don't use the address, this location. I want to select the work location from the dropdown. All right, so I can select the particular work location rather than typing it in and use the address from that. All right, similar to the department override, there is a department on the position. You may have seen when I was setting up, there was a field called department. But if I want to say, no, this one is getting hired into the sales department, then I can do that there. And of course, the position type, again, this is on the position by default. But maybe this time I'm going to be hiring somebody who's part-time, even though the default is full-time. So just some options there. Here you'll see that job description. It pulled in what you saw I put in earlier. And of course, now I can go through and edit this if I need to. Maybe I don't need this stuff here at the end that a system added. So I'll just go ahead and remove those things. And I may need to have some attachments, so I can add those right there. All right, so I'll go ahead and hit save. Just to kind of move this one along here. And you'll notice your days open -4 because I didn't set it to open until Monday, but this will update as thing goes along. And of course, people can't apply yet because it's not open, but it is in here. Now, if a hiring manager does this, you may want to have an approval workflow for this, so they can go through those exact same fields as a hiring manager, but then it maybe goes to the recruiter or HR or one or more people to get approved before it becomes, an open position. So you can set up a workflow for approval for hiring managers if you need to do that there. Just to show you this position here, this is viewing the information from the position it's attached to. So I can't change this, but I can view it if I need to. All right. And then publishing options here. Now, this allows you to publish it in various places. In fact, you may notice that this one is published automatically because I set that as a default. So let me show you where that is. Let me just open this up in another tab here. And let's talk about job publishing sites. So we have these currently available. You'll see Career Site, Indeed, and some other ones. So Career Site and Intranet are ones that we create for you, and you can embed in your website, or you can use them if you like to do that. Let's talk about the Career Site here just for a moment. So here you'll see I can, of course, make it enabled. Now it's checked as default. That's why it published there right away. So it is the default there. So you can tell it, as soon as a job is open is in like saved and approved and everything, I want this one to publish there. All right, and here you'll notice I can say, I want to have a redirect. What this is after somebody applies, maybe you have a web page that says, thank you for applying. We'll be in contact with you shortly or something like that. You can have that URL right here after somebody applies. That's what this is for when the application is done using our application built in. All right, otherwise what it'll do is it just returns back to the job site. So just be aware of that. All right, here is the job listing format. So when somebody is looking at this, in fact, let me just pop this open here so you can see what I'm speaking about. It's no longer active. Let's just, it'll get me to where I want to go. I might need to put a 1 there because I have different ones for different companies. There we go. So this is the job site. As I mentioned, this could be embedded. But let's talk about this. So first off is the job listing, and I'll get into one in a second, but I'm actually, you'll see here, I can choose to show certain things. How do I want to, show this? So I want to show it by department, by location, whatever it is. I can choose the options for what is showing right here. So I can turn things on or off. Maybe I do want to show the department there, but the posting date's not important to me, or the city and state's not important, or whatever. I can go ahead and change those things. And then of course, when I refresh the site, I will see that reflected right here. You see how that kind of changed that there? So that's what that's for, those different columns that are showing up under the job listing. That's what these are right here. All right, now the job view, the food vendor one is not available because it's not active yet. It's not active till Monday. Let me go into this existing merchandise seller. This is the job view. And again, I can turn on or off various things. If I do want to show the city and state or whatever, I can do that right there. All right, and again, if I save that, you'll see these columns will show up or disappear depending on whatever I selected. All right, so that's what it's talking about right there. All right, let me go back into that right there. So that's this site here. And then this allows you to change like the colors and things like that. If you want to do that, you'll see this. This, we're going to use this for our internal one. We wanted to display our logo right there. We want to show and apply with Indeed button. We want to ask the questions. That's the question set. You want to show the application. So if I don't check these here, what'll happen is even if I have a question set, an application, added there, if I don't have these turned on, it won't ask them. It won't go to those pages. It'll override that. So that it just says like for everything, just skip those. All right, and then you'll see here like the size of these things. That allows you to embed this into a frame on your website. So if you have a web developer and they want to embed this into your website, you can tell it, all right, here's the size. They might tell you a certain size, and then this is the frame code that you would send to them that will allow them to embed that into the website. All right, but you'll see like the colors and so forth. Again, I can change these colors and things like that. And then I have my default language as English, but if you want to set it as like French or something, you can do that right there. All right, so that's the job publishing options. Now that is for the career site and intranet. Now, when we do like Indeed or ZipRecruiter or stuff like that, There are different options in there for those, but it's not as much because, of course, Indeed is creating the website for you. ZipRecruiter is creating the website. But you'll see here, like I can say, yes, I want to enable the street address. That'll send the street address to Indeed. I want to have this custom redirect. So if they apply, it goes to your website and redirects right there. But not a lot of settings in here for Indeed and the other ones down there. Here for the publishing sites, it will post to, let's say, Facebook that you have an open position. You can set the default text. If you have like kind of a default you want, you can change that text. All right, so that's the job publishing sites, as you can see right in there. And let's go back to the open position here. So that's the settings right there. And I did want to talk just briefly about the candidate before we kind of wrap this up right here. And oh, I don't have any candidates because this one's brand new. Let me go to my one that's not brand new. But I want to show you kind of what it looks like when we have people in there. Now, first off, you'll notice the different columns when I'm looking at this kind of grid view here. Let's just talk about that real quick. You can search over here to limit this. So I have like multiple employers. If I wanted to see just the Graduate School Inc., I can do that there. Of course, if I want to look for just, accounts or something like that, limit this. What was it, account payable? I don't remember what it was. Anyways, I can, search for that. I can look for, ones that are filled and so forth. So I have options here if I want to, use this right there. And here I can show ones that are inactive. So they're no longer hiring for those things. So I'm able to see that right there. And of course, I can scroll over to see more, or if you have a nice wide window, you don't need to do that. And you can reorder the columns, if you wanted to do that, maybe the total candidates you want right there or something. And, I can also, of course, remove or add columns if I would like that. All right, so you see that right there. Very simple to be able to do that. You'll notice right here, when there is a new candidate, it does show this here. In fact, what it does, if I had a new applicant, it'll put a little red thing next to that applicant when I go in there too. So you'll know who it is. So if you have a lot, when you come into here and I go to candidates, you see a little red dot. So it helps me to find those people who are new. As you view them, that red dot will go away. All right, so that's how I see my candidates there. Now, we are going to have a training on candidates. In fact, next time is our candidate one. But I did want to point out that you can add candidates right here. What that means is that if you already have a candidate in the system, it'd be a good fit for a food vendor. You can go out there, find that candidate, and add them in. So if I come in and I say, Joanne would be great for this, I can add her in. Oh, there might be she might have an issue, but I can add somebody in there like that. You'll see some of the other actions I can do here. I can move candidates from this one to another. So that's very useful. Let's say during the summer, you hired a bunch of food vendors and, you got a bunch of applicants who didn't make it because you only had so many openings, but there were some other great ones that you just couldn't, fit. You can move them from this one to another position, another requisition. So I might say, you know what, these three, they'd be a good fit for the next ones. I can move those if I need to another one. So you'll see here, move candidates. I can select who I'm looking for. I can look for their status and so forth. And then I can, move them over. So, whatever I need to do there, I might, select the one here and move them over there. I might have different statuses. Maybe I've got like a good fit, but didn't make it status. You can do that right there. All right. And, we'll get more into candidates in a little bit. I did want to kind of finish off here by talking about those security profiles that are used to identify recruiters as well as hiring managers. So just so you're aware where that's located, if you go into your security profiles, if you have access to this is something that we added. I believe it was in the last update, may have been in the first quarter update, but you'll see recruiter and hiring manager here. Now, these are very straightforward, like just what level of access do they have and the name of the profile. So if you want to change this, you certainly can. Maybe you call this, I don't know, hiring person, HR hiring person. You can certainly do that, but the access level would be recruiter. And you'll see there's another one in here for hiring manager. So that's how we know what they are. So these two were added to everybody. If you have deleted them, you can add them back. It's no problem there. All right. And then what you would do is you would assign that to the employees who are going to be doing that role. So what I would do is, for an example, go to HR, and let's say, we'll pick somebody out here. Ticketing supervisor should be a hiring manager. Under miscellaneous here, I can add hiring manager to their profile. All right, so I might have them, yes, they're a ticketing supervisor, so they're a manager, but they're also a hiring manager. Right? So very simple to do that. So that's what I was saying. If somebody, you're not seeing the hiring manager, that's how you expose that to them. Same type of thing with recruiter. You've got a, HR person or whatever, they're helping you out with recruiting. You might say, yes, this person is a recruiter, and I need to add that profile called recruiter to them right down here. So again, I would just select that one. This doesn't give them any more access to anything. It is simply used to show them in that list of recruiters and or hiring managers. All right, so that is a high level of the open positions there. I did see there was a couple of things that came through. So thank you for asking those questions, and thank you, Patrick, for answering those questions on there. If there is something additional, I can get together with Patrick and we can get you, an additional answer. And I do want to, of course, point out just very quickly, if you have some ideas about candidate the positions, and you say, "Oh, it'd be great to have this field," or "The system did it this way," right here, this new idea could be used to suggest that great new idea that you have. And you can see here as I go out, there are a lot of great new ideas that are out here, and we do take these and we add them into the system here. And so if you have an idea that you like and you think it would be great for the system, please post that new idea. Maybe you mock up a little screenshot if you need to. And we will evaluate these things. We look at the votes and how quickly we can get this in the system, and we add those types of things in. So I did want to mention that there. Let me just very briefly talk about what's upcoming in our Criterion Learning series here. So we say go forward. You should be able to see my screen now, talking about our upcoming webinars. And I'm going through the end of the year here because we are, as I mentioned earlier, going to be talking about candidates in 2 weeks. So kind of showing both sides of the recruiting there. And then we're going to move into year end. We do 2 year-end classes for US and 2 for Canada because not everybody can attend. But if you're not a payroll person, may not be very useful to you. So we would see you in the new year. But if you do have a colleague who's in payroll, they're not here today, you may want to remind them that starting in November 6th, we're going to be covering year end for US, and then the 20th of November for Canada, and then repeating it again in December 4th for the US and 18th for Canada. And of course, our help is always here for you, help@criterionhcm.com. You can reach out to us if you have questions about recruiting and open positions and so forth, or of course, payroll as we get towards the end of the year. I'm sure there's a lot of questions that come up for payroll. So we want to make sure we accommodate that. All right. And finally, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate your time. We hope to see you again in a couple of weeks. And thank you for being a Criterion customer.